There's Linda.
Chip here?
We have everyone, Layla.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, I will call the first 2025-26 budget meeting at 2 p.m. Tuesday, April 29th. Today, our city manager, Layla Aman, will present the 25-26 proposed budget for the city of Manzanita. And if needed, we'll continue to present on Tuesday, April 30th. The first two meetings are not open for public comment. However, the third meeting, which is on May 6th from 6 to 7 p.m., will be open for public comment. With that, I will turn it over to Layla.
Thank you, Chair. I am going to share my screen and share presentation. Trust everyone can see that okay?
Yep.
All right. Well, good. Well, welcome. Hi. It's nice to be able to talk to some folks about this. We've been working really hard in the last 6 months, really. So this kind of represents a culmination of a lot of effort on behalf of myself and many others. So I'll start with, I only have 197 slides today. Just kidding. I have far less than that, but enough to get us through. So kind of taking, want to make sure that we take our time, hence the snail. We don't need to go too slow. We just need to be deliberate and thorough. So I will do my best to make sure that I do that, but I would invite any members of the budget committee at any time to stop me, ask questions, so to consider this kind of a conversation as we go along. I found that this is my fourth year. This is my third year presenting a budget I've done, right? I think 3 years, 4. And that seems to work best if we do it that way. So we don't necessarily need to save all the questions till the end. So please do raise your hand would probably be the best, just in case a couple of folks have something they want to ask. And I'll do my best to call on you if the chair doesn't mind me taking that on as you have questions. So the format of today's presentation, we'll really go through just really very briefly an introduction kind of to the document. I know many of you have been reading this with a fine-tooth comb, and I appreciate that. I've gotten a few comments back, and they're just minor corrections that will be addressed when this goes to City Council. The first order of business and one of my responsibilities by law is to deliver the budget message. But I did learn I don't have to read it verbatim, so I'm not going to this year. I'm just going to hit some of the highlights. I know all of you have read it, and I appreciate you doing that. And then I'll briefly go into the city overview. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the history or the demographics, but that was a new addition to the budget this year. We're starting to structure this budget to eventually get us to the Government Financial Officers Association Budget Award. And so some of that background information that wasn't in years previous started to show up this year so that we can start to prepare ourselves to get that recognition. But I will talk about council goals, kind of the organizational chart, and just sort of remind not just the folks that are here, but the folks that are watching, because all those things are relevant to the different budgets that you will see today. And then kind of a reminder and just review of the budgeting process. Again, a lot of this is just to provide background for all of you, as well as those members of the public. And then we'll delve into the financial sections. So talking about trends that inform our revenue projections. And then we go into the detailed budgets by fund and department. And then we'll look at kind of historic and future data projections. So projections for the next 5 years. and then briefly touch on the capital improvement plan. All right. So just to give folks that are watching and all of you, I'm not going through every single element here, but the budget was very, it looked a little different this year. And again, as I mentioned, there was quite a bit more information in here this year. And my hope is that provides the public with some clear understanding of how the budget process works, what the city is about, and how we do this. And so it's kind of divided up into 9 parts: the intro, the budget message, the profile of the city, our financial architecture, financial trends, our key budget drivers, financial sections, the capital improvement plan, and then we have appendices. So that's the structure of the budget. And then all of you, so we have 5 people who are from the community at large, and then our city council, so the 10 of you serve as our budget committee. And you will know that. So it is my pleasure to welcome you to the proposed budget for the 2025-26 season. This budget serves as our financial roadmap. So it's really carefully crafted with community priorities and city council goals in mind. Throughout this presentation, we'll explore how the budget demonstrates our commitment to responsible stewardship, transparency, and strategic planning for our future. And this budget follows Oregon budget laws and generally accepted accounting principles. I'll talk a little bit more about this, but we use a cash basis of accounting, and we are in compliance with state requirements. So I invite you to join us as we examine the financial health, key investments, strategic initiatives, and that will shape our future. So just quickly, the financial health and outlook. I think we are entering this fiscal year from a position of strength. Both our governmental and our utility funds maintain healthy reserves, which provides stability and flexibility to address unforeseen challenges. This strong foundation allows us to pursue strategic investments as well while maintaining essential services. One thing I do want to point out, and I'll also point this out at the end as a reminder, it kind of looks like the water utility goes down and then back up. And that's a result of the grant that we received. So when we allocated all those funds to the water utility last year, that made the fund balance go up. And then there's less allocated this year, so it goes down. But if those funds weren't here, you would have seen a steady increase in the water utility fund. So, when I first mapped this out, it was like, what? And then I was like, oh, right. Yeah, we had like $1 million. And then and that's kind of one of the reasons why it looks that way. But the good news is that it's increasing and it looks good for us now and into the future. One of the key improvements, and this has been something I've been working on since I've been here, but I think I took a much greater leap this year, is really transitioning towards more accurate revenue projections. So getting closer to the mark in terms of what we're actually bringing in and our expenditure projections. And that's a change from past practice, which relied primarily on overly conservative estimates. And that often resulted in just significant variances between budgeted and actual figures for both revenue and expenditures. So we've worked really hard to develop a more precise forecast based on historic trends and realistic growth projections. And then on the expenditure side, we have also made some strides in terms of just getting a little bit closer to what we actually do and need, so that we have kind of a clearer picture of our spending. So a lot of this budget is not only just about, making sure the city is running, that we're providing the services that the community wants, expects, and desires of us, but it also is implementing council goals. And so I want to just briefly go over those.
Layla, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
It's Jeff. Good. I don't know if you're cutting out from time to time. I get a 10 or 15 second freeze. Then you start. It works fine. I don't know if anybody else is experiencing that. But going back to the last page, about the reserves. One of the questions I had, it seems like we have a strong reserve position. It says gives us an opportunity to pursue strategic investments. What does that mean? Have we thought of any strategic investments? I don't know.
Yeah, I will actually get to that, Jeff. And if you don't mind, we can pause on that for a moment. And then if you don't feel like the question has been adequately answered, we can further that conversation. But that is something I will get to in a couple more slides.
Okay.
And it's actually related to one of the topic items that is right in front of us today, which is one of the goals that City Council in our retreat we discussed was strategic planning. So looking at long-term plans, not only for revenue, but what to do with our assets, how to handle emergency management. So those are one of the goals that City Council has set for us for the year. So again, I'll cover this a little bit more later in the presentation, but I appreciate the question and we'll make sure I get to it. So again, council goals is so we're leveling up. That's kind of a continual theme, at least since I've been here. And one of the main focuses will be completing, and we're very close to completing the actual construction of, but then the opening of City Hall, investment in staff, and then continued engagement with our community. The Classic Street Connection project is a major capital project. In fact, we had our first, it was a mandatory pre-bid meeting today. We had a great turnout for that. But our goal is to complete that project before the end of this calendar year. So you will see resources budgeted for that carrying over from this year. And then finally, Envision Manzanita, which is completion of updating the comprehensive plan. My goal is to finish that before the end of calendar 2026. I hope we can get there. But we'll also be implementing housing rules by the end of this fiscal year. Did I miss anything, Council? Does that feel good? All right. Okay, so just kind of to reflect on sort of what we've accomplished and what we're in the midst of, but we'll be finishing City Hall. Substantial completion is on track for May 15th. And then we're expecting to get our certificate of occupancy at the end of the month. And that's exactly on track. And we are on budget. And so that's very exciting. The Classic Street project, as I mentioned, is underway. We are currently out to bid. We had a strong showing of interest in that project. So that's really exciting. And that represents the $2.7 million that we received from the state of Oregon to implement that project. We're expecting to start construction in mid-June. And then one of the other things that will be included in here and part of the discussion is that we are anticipating beginning repayment of the Special Public Works Fund debt that we took out for City Hall. That may or may not happen this year, but we wanted to budget for that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the City Hall project. But it's a significant milestone for us. And I just want to acknowledge just the years of effort and work that went into that. And so excited to see that come to fruition. There are a few staffing and organizational updates that I'll be talking about throughout the budget. The first is a police officer position. So my budget includes a proposal to convert our code enforcement officer position to a sworn police officer position, which will still focus on code enforcement, but he will have additional capabilities to be able to support and serve our community as well as his other colleagues in the police department. The budget also includes a planning and permit technician. You might recall, those of you who were with us last year, that we did not fill that position last year, but we do need that position this year. And so that is included in this year's budget proposal. And then City Council approved a project manager position, which our former intern was going to take, but it did not. And so that is an open position, but is also included in this year's budget.
Is Layla frozen up?
Yes, I'll try and get in touch with her.
Thank you.
All right, that's fun. Sorry about that. All of City Hall just froze. I started hearing everyone around us. So where did you lose me? Or where did I lose you, actually?
You were just talking about the project manager position.
Okay. All right. Okay. Sorry, I got to get myself reset up. It just crashed everything. So my apologies.
You were in a good state when you froze, because usually when I freeze, it's.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. All right. Is the PowerPoint back up?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Because that's better than the interruption that happened at Planning Commission. So sorry about that. Okay. I guess I'll go back a slide. Yeah, okay. So I was talking about the project manager position. And then we're also doing additional leveling up work this year too, which is enhancing our internal controls. That's work that Nina is leading with our finance advisor. We're still continuing to improve our digital accessibility. So hopefully getting ourselves in a space where we can have online mapping and access to things like resolutions and so forth. Continuing policy implementation. So, for example, the short-term rental policy that Council has just recently directed staff to begin working on. Strategic planning. We're going to be doing a lot of infrastructure planning this year. And then I did not forget about the codification of our ordinances. And the other topic, too, that I raised in my budget message is just continuing to again, level up our outreach and engagement with the community through various channels. And so the project manager position will be essential to that. In terms of Envision Manzanita, the real big topics here for us are Senate Bill 406 implementation. So that's Oregon's middle housing rules. So updating housing ordinance to comply with those rules. Planning Commission is in the knee deep in this stuff right now. And our hope is to have a draft ordinance before City Council in June. And then finishing the comprehensive plan. So really getting back on our feet once the housing work is complete, and finishing the rest of those chapters. And then really starting to think about annexation planning. We had a 12-acre piece of land annexed into the city recently, and so want to be mindful of the impacts of all of those things on our community. So we're thinking ahead, thinking about growth, and and how we can continue to serve our community at a high level. In terms of strategic planning initiatives, so this is one of the things that City Council will be working on over the next year is considering our long-term fiscal stability. So how do we build sustainable financial practices? That's actually something staff will be really focusing on. Sorry about that. And then revenue diversification. So this has been an ongoing topic for our council, and we will continue that work. Capital improvement planning. So really taking a systemic approach to our infrastructure needs. You will note that the capital improvement plan this year is what I would call a CIP light. It really focuses only on the current fiscal year, and there's intentionality behind that. We have a new public works director who's doing an excellent job. We have a council who's very interested in how we utilize our resources to be more resilient. And we felt that it was a good time for us to take a moment once City Hall is complete and Classic Street is well underway to really look at the breadth of projects that we have and how to prioritize those projects so that we can do them. So I will be working with our public works director on that over the next year and engaging with council and discussions about that. And then again, emergency management. So how are we preparing for the future and for natural disasters? And really, again, it's always a balancing act of addressing our immediate day-to-day and operational needs while simultaneously investing in long-term stability. So this dual focus ensures that we can meet our community's expectations while building a sustainable foundation for generations to come. And finally, this marks the end of my budget message. I want to give a big thanks to the staff that really supported and contributed to this budget. Nina, in particular, and then Bonnie Dennis, who is our government financial advisor, just played a tremendous role in the quality and a lot of the back end work on this budget, which is a lot. So I want to thank them both deeply from the bottom of my heart. Also, Chief Eric Harth, Scott Gebhardt, and Rick Renfer for their contributions to this budget. It really is a team effort, and putting all of our minds together is what I think results in the budget that you have before you today, which I'm really proud of, and it really does represent countless hours of planning and thoughtful consideration. So I want to thank them all for that. And I should note that I'll be the main event today. Sorry about that, but I do have all the department heads here. So as we go through their budgets, if there are questions that come up that I can't answer, Eric, Rick, and Scott will be available. Okay, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I do want to note that we're 80 years old this year. So that's awesome. It didn't really occur to me until I was doing the budget that this fiscal year, we're turning 80. So congratulations to us. We look great for our age. We were incorporated in April of 1946. And, we all, Tom probably especially, we all know this story. We grew quite a lot when Highway 101 was established. And now all of us are really focusing in on kind of the modern Manzanita, which really does, I think, maintain its uniqueness as really a treasured coastal getaway. And I'm glad that we all get to be part of that. It's really a privilege. So the budget, the budget philosophy, so to speak, is that it serves as our primary financial management strategy. It reflects annual service and financial goals, and it outlines our work plan for the coming year. We do our best to detail the costs associated with delivering those essential services, programs, and resources to the community. And those budget allocations are designed to be cost effective and ensures that the city meets the needs of the residents. The city council, in terms of governance, sets the policies that reflect the collective community interest, and they established annual policy goals, as I've already reviewed in my budget message. And then my job is to prioritize those policies and projects and programs within the budget. So my job as the budget officer, which I'm required to be per our charter, is that I prepare the annual budget. I do that through a collaborative process with my department heads and key staff so that we can align our financial resources with the service expectations and our community's priorities. Okay. So our budget follows Oregon budget law. There's standard procedures for that. We do financial estimates. We have certain measures of financial controls. We provide descriptions of what these resources are being spent on. We take public input through public hearings. So as the chair mentioned, we have public hearing on May 6th, and then we have another on May 28th. And the goal of this is transparency, is to ensure that the public and the taxpayers, they know what we're spending our resources on and what our financial policies are. Your job as the budget committee is to review the process, and that starts with what I just did, which is receiving the budget message, reviewing the budget. You evaluate the budget, and you may approve it as presented, or you may make modifications before you grant final approval. And so that's the substance of our conversation today. Once this budget is approved by the budget committee, it is then sent to City Council for final consideration and adoption prior to the June 30th deadline. And right now that meeting is set for May 28th. We can do budget amendments. We actually just did this. And so you will note, as many of you probably did, that the budget reflects the supplemental budget that City Council approved last month. And so that requires a council approval. It requires a public hearing and a change in appropriations, those transfers. And that has to be done. We have to notice that. So we just went through that process. It's a common practice. My hope is we don't have to do a supplemental this year. But for projects that run over multiple fiscal years, sometimes that can happen. But there is a process for that. So again, just a reminder of the process. Staff spent a lot of time working between January and this month to prepare the budget. This is our first budget committee hearing tomorrow if we need one. And then on May 6th will be the public hearing, and then City Council will adopt on May 28th. And just to remind folks too, because the budgets are organized by funds and departments, and just kind of what sort of form of government the city has here. So it's a council manager form of government. The mayor appoints the mayor and city council are really guided by the community as representatives of the community. They appoint the city attorney, the municipal judge, and then the city manager. And then the city manager oversees all of the city's operations, which can be divided into kind of 4 categories: administration, development services, public works, and public safety. Okay, this is detailed out in our budget, but just to kind of remind folks, our financial architecture is based on fund accounting. So we have different specific funds that serve specific purposes. We meet specific financial accounting standards. We have budgetary principles that guide how we do that. And then the financial management of how we balance our immediate operational needs with long-term capital investments. The types of funds that we have are governmental funds. So that includes the general fund, which is the primary operating fund for the city. Special revenue funds, and those are restricted to specific purposes, such as the building fund or the tourism fund. capital project funds. So those are project funds that are for major capital projects that receive financing. So we have City Hall is one of those. Debt service funds, those are to manage repayment of long-term debt, typically general obligation bonds, and we don't have any of those, but just for you to understand what the types of funds are. And then permanent funds, and those are where resources rolling earnings may be spent, and we don't have any of those either. There's also proprietary funds. So they operate like private sector businesses, and their revenues and expenditures have to be tracked separately. And the proprietary fund that the city has is the water fund. And then there's fiduciary funds, which are we manage assets that are held in, we held in trustee, but they're not available for city operations. They don't have any budgetary impact, and so they're strictly separated from operational funds. Okay, so our financial structure looks like this in terms of government funds. We have the general fund. The special revenue funds include the building fund, the transportation fund, the tourism fund, and the public works reserve fund. Our capital project funds are the City Hall Expansion Fund and the System Development Charges Fund. And then our only proprietary fund, which is also an enterprise fund, is the water utility. Just again, we use accounting standards and practices to develop this budget. Our budgetary basis of accounting is cash basis. We have a comprehensive financial audit that is conducted annually. We also send out quarterly reports to the budget committee for review, and the city council receives monthly reports on our spending versus what has been budgeted for. And we have budgetary reserves. So the only official policy reserve we have is for the general fund. And fund balance policies, making sure that we have sufficient reserves within each fund to provide financial stability and mitigate risk. So why are budgetary reserves? And so this is related to the question that Jeffrey brought up. We keep reserves beyond just the policy reserves because it does affect our credit rating, right? And our credit rating, the last time we had it done was in 2022, prior to taking out debt for City Hall, which was AA- and stable, which was an increase from the last rating we had. And that's actually very good for a city our size. It's a very strong rating, and it suggests sound financial management, stable revenue streams, and strong governance. Contingency reserves. So many of the budgets include contingency, help deal with any unforeseen expenses, and those require council approval to use. We don't have any uses of contingency this year, but if we did, we would actually bring that to city council in a resolution and request that that money be transferred into a particular line item within a budget. And then the unappropriated fund balance is intended for future years unless significant issues arise. And that should also say, or we want to invest in a specific kind of project. And so we've maintained a pretty high, I mean, it's not very high, but we've maintained a healthy fund balance in the general fund, and we're starting to get there with the water fund. Tom.
Thank you. So in our quarterly meetings, persistently, we've seen that use of money figures are much higher than what we had budgeted for. And I'm assuming that these budgetary reserves are the driver of that, is the investment strategy with those reserves. Am I correct in that, first of all? And then can you talk a little bit about what the city's investment strategy is with those reserves?
So I want to understand your question because we are not over anything. We haven't spent more than we budgeted for in any category that I'm aware of.
No, it's not a spending more, it's making more.
Making more money.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. And that has to do with, I think, as I mentioned earlier, we had a history of underestimating revenue. And so we're trying to get a little more precise about that. And so that's one of the things that contributes to that fund balance. The other is, quite honestly, the jump that we had when COVID hit. There was a huge increase in the transient lodging tax because more people were coming to the coast, and that has been sustained since that time period. So that has allowed us to maintain a healthy fund balance in the general fund. Since we right-sized our water utility rates, this is, I think, the first year that we're starting to see that we have enough in the water utility to actually create a policy reserve and are building up a healthier reserve in the water fund. That was not the case the first year that I was here. So hopefully, does that answer your question, Tom? Sweet. Okay, thanks. All right. So in terms of reserve policies, the reason to have them is to maintain financial stability. So we always want to maintain.
I got a question here.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Go back to the last slide, please. Did you say the credit rating of our city is A minus?
Double A minus.
Double A minus. From which credit agents?
S&P.
S&P. Okay. They come in. How do we receive it? They just come in, or they just rate every city?
We requested it before we took out our loan for city.
Okay, got it. Yes.
Yeah, and that was, I think it was issued in October of 2022. So,
okay. The contingency reserves here. I see when I read through the budget this year, I see some new contingency reserve you set up. If it is unforeseen, how do you know where we should set it up?
So how do we know where to add contingencies? Is that
exactly because it is for unforeseen expenses. If it is unforeseen, how do you know that?
Well,
we don't. Happen?
We don't. Exactly. We do our very best to make an estimate of what the potential impact could be.
Okay. All right.
And we look at past use as well. So we try to see, like, have we used contingency in the past? If not, we just put a reasonable number in there that doesn't really put us over our revenue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. No problem. Okay.
I got my hand up.
I don't see you for some reason, but go ahead, please.
All right. Sorry, it's Jeff. Going back to that pursuing strategic investments, and you mentioned that the council went on a retreat and they wanted to look at projects, the breadth of projects. And also, I think you mentioned when you talked about pursuing strategic investments, infrastructure. And can you give me an example of what you might be talking about or thinking about?
Sure. So one example would be we're about to move out of our current facility, and the police are about to move out of their current facility, and that leaves us with 2 assets that will not be utilized. And so part of the discussion with council will be to understand what the future of those facilities could be. The other is we're in the middle of a comprehensive plan update. And so we'll be getting a lot of input and feedback from the community about things folks want to see. Park development, trails, etc. So having a discussion about those projects in relation to necessary infrastructure projects as well. So those are a couple of examples of those kinds of projects. And I think we are a staff that we do a lot for the size that we are. And one of the things that's been very important to me is that the projects that we budget for are the projects that we do. I really like to level set expectations to both be aspirational, but also grounded in reality. So the projects that you see in this year's budget are projects that we will complete and we have the capacity to complete. And so part of that discussion with council is understanding the goals and then how does that align with staff capacity to actually deliver on those goals.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay, so I won't go into detail on this, but we meet all these requirements and standards. So we're operating in an environment that complies with generally accepted accounting principles, accounting, auditing, and financial reporting standards, et cetera. So, and I think that was evidenced by a basically near perfect audit this year. So I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of Nina, because it's all her. Okay, so we're going to jump into the financial section and just broadly first, and then we'll dive into each of the funds. So our major revenue sources are property taxes, intergovernmental agreements, including state shared revenue, grants, et cetera, fees and charges. And then transient lodging tax is the largest component of our overall budget. Transient lodging tax is a significant revenue source. And so everybody knows that's imposed on short-term rental accommodations such as hotels, vacation rentals, and other lodging establishments like bed and breakfast. The city of Manzanita currently imposes a 9% transient lodging tax. 7% of that remains entirely with the city of Manzanita for general fund purposes. So that's a primary source of funding for the majority of the city's activities that are not related to the water system. The remaining 2% is distributed between the general fund. So 30% of that 2% is in the general fund and 70% of the 2% is allocated to the tourism fund. Brad.
If the voters decide in May to raise the TLT amount, we would have higher than 7%, but with the remaining 2%, would that remain 2% of the new percentage?
So that's ultimately a decision for city council. So what Brad's referring to, just for folks that may not be aware, there is going to be a measure on the ballot this year that the county is putting forward that would raise the transient lodging tax to 12% starting in September of 2025, and then increasing to 14% in July of 2026. Currently, the countywide TLT is 10%. We collect 9% and 1% goes to the county. The city council will make a decision as to whether or not we want to raise our TLT to 11% and 13% respectively, and the county will still retain 1%. Or if the ballot measure passes and we do not do that, then we retain our 9% and then 3 or 5% will go to the county.
Thank you.
Yep. Property taxes. So it's one of the most stable and significant funding sources for the general fund. It's not a huge amount, but it is an important piece of the pie. But it is subject to pretty severe limits as a result of ballot measures 5 and 50. These funds, again, go into the general fund. They support core services such as public safety, parks, court planning, and general government operations. Our permanent tax rate is 42 cents per thousand. That rate cannot be changed. The tax rate is considered one of the lowest in the state of Oregon. And on average, the city receives $127 per household on property taxes. even though the median income, median home value is $800,000. And again, that's a result of Measure 50 primarily, but it's the combination of Measures 5 and 50, which limits the maximum assessed value of homes. So even though we've seen a lot of development, we've seen a lot of expensive homes built, the way that the assessed value is calculated results in significantly less revenue than you would get if it was calculated based on market rate. And I checked, I wanted to find out, I didn't write it down. In Tillamook County, it's called the change property ratio is 0.484. So it's basically like 50% of the real market value is what is assessed. So even though we see growth, we don't see a huge amount of growth in property tax revenue. Our fees and our cost policies. So we have a master fee schedule now. We adopted that last year. Council annually approves that. So that includes fees for services, water utility rates, and building rates too. So we propose an option to City Council every year prior to the budget process, and they approve that by a resolution. We use an indirect cost methodology. I'll touch briefly on that. And then we also rely on a capitalization policy, which is basically anything that's $5,000 or more is what we consider to be a capital project. The expenditure categories that we use in the budget can be broken down into primarily 4 different categories: personnel services, which are salaries and benefits for the city employees; materials and services; operational costs, maintenance, and contracted services. So we, for example, contract with the city attorney; capital outlay, so those are capital projects; and then any debt service. And I sent out an update. The budget committee received one version, and we posted the updated version on Friday, which included this debt service table correction. So this outlines the current debt that the city carries. There's a water revenue bond, the Underhill Plaza, that's the land, and the visitor center. Both of those obligations retire at the end of 2027. So they'll be paid off at the end of 2027. Brad.
Could you educate us a bit more about what the water revenue bond is?
That is for, my understanding is that is for the water treatment plant. I see Linda nodding her head. Kit.
Hi, I'm looking on at page 36 of your package, and then you talk about the future debt. And you are talking about the City Hall fund, right? We borrow from OBDD, $4.1 million. It's going to mature in May 2027. And after that, we're planning to issue bonds for the remaining, right? And then
close. Yeah, sorry. So thank you. So right now we're using a special public works fund. I called it kind of a construction loan. And so that loan is taken out in a reimbursement basis, and we're being charged accruing interest at 2.1%. And you're correct. It matures on May 14th, 2027, but that loan will be transferred to the Oregon Bond Bank. So we as a city will not be issuing bonds. Okay. Those bonds will be issued by the state of Oregon. And at that time, that will establish fixed payments and our repayment terms, including interest.
Okay. Now, the current interest rate is 2.1, which is fantastic. I've never heard this. So this is very good. But then
One of the
we don't
reasons
know
we
the interest
selected
rate.
it, but that will likely not be the interest rate that we get when we.
Yes, yes. So I was thinking that, then it's essential to make a projection of the interest rate and then mature date and then the bond amount, that how much is it going to be? And then I don't see it anywhere here because 2027 is just another year budget. So I would like to urge you guys, next year budget, we need to make consideration of the projection.
Yeah, thank you. And I did do some of that. So I looked at a couple of different options in order to come up with an estimate for a debt service payment. And so that's where we landed on $295,000. But that again is, a best estimate at this point. And once those terms are set, then we will have a lot more information. I did check in with Business Oregon about when they expect to do that bond sale, and it sounds like it will be the end of calendar 2026. So it's quite possible that we don't actually have a debt service payment. And one of the things that I will talk with council about, but certainly would welcome feedback from this committee as well, is that if we budgeted that amount, we actually can pay off some of that debt before it gets sold to the bond market, to the Oregon Bond Bank, which would reduce our overhead. And so I think if it doesn't get refinanced, that will be something we'll talk with City Council about when I have a little more clarity about when that bond sale will occur and whether or not it makes sense to make that.
It's a big amount of money, and then for the small city, it will have quite a big impact on the financial in the future. And then I see you have the 5-year forecast when I look at it, and then you forecast that every year is like $300,000 and $400,000 paid back. And then that would include some of the principal and interest. So I'm just interested to know that what do you forecast for the loan amount when you transfer to the bond bank, the Oregon Bond Bank? That is something that needs to be considered. And of course, the interest rate we don't know yet.
Right.
And maybe make a few scenario from the lower rate to the highest rate that you consider. That will be a better way of, you don't have a crystal ball, but at least you think about it. And what is the worst scenario, the best scenario? Because as I see that, let's say $400,000 you pay off from the general fund is quite heavy, for every year. So I'm just worried about the debt service in the future.
Yeah, and I did do that. I ran a number of different scenarios at a number of different interest rates. The 4.1 is our maximum. I don't want to speak too soon, but I think that we will be coming in under that in terms of the amount we borrow. So I feel like what we have in the budget and included in the forecast is conservative. And then it's also good to remember that the Underhill loan payment goes away at the end of 2027. And so that will help things. The city's maintained that debt service for 10 years almost. But I agree with you. I think it would make sense. Like the less debt we have to finance, the better for sure. Yeah. Thank you though.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sean.
Yeah. Layla, what interest rate were you using in those estimates on those payments? Was it the 4.1%?
I looked between 4 and 6 and 30 and 20-year terms.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's not precise, but I felt like that feels good. That number feels good to me. Okay. So indirect costs, these are costs that cannot, can be clearly attributed to a specific service. Direct costs are. Indirect costs are ones that are not, but they're necessary for running a city. They can't be assigned to any specific department, program, or service, but the costs support the overall operations. And so for us, the two funds that generate that kind of revenue are the building fund and the water utility. We have a pretty detailed process that we used to create the indirect cost allocation. We went into that. We actually included that in the budget this year as opposed to an appendix to provide a clear overview of that. And it allows those service departments to fairly account for the administration and operational support that they receive. And it follows that 5-step process that I just talked about. Would we establish this? City Council adopted this by resolution. We said after the first kind of 3 years that we would take a look at it. We're also seeing some personnel changes, and I believe the chair pulled me aside to say, now that's also a good time to take a look at this. And so one of the things that I had meant to do at our last budget committee meeting was to suggest that we establish some sort of subcommittee to take a look at this and help evaluate it. And so I think we'll carry that into our next check-in meeting and talk about what appropriate next steps will be. But that's the allocation model that we used for this year. All right, are you ready for the budgets? Tom.
Thank you. Before we leave the indirect cost thing, I've got a couple things I just wanted to say. Number one, thank you so much. I mean, the amount of ink that you spilled on discussing indirect costs, I thought was really, really good, given the fact that our critic in chief is constantly talking about indirect costs in social media. And, it really helps me a lot when I go out into the community to be able to have a really detailed understanding of this, because it's not an easy concept for those of us that didn't use it before in our normal lives. So I really appreciate that. I also ended up doing a little bit of chatting and finding out, you've got this passage on page 41 about the FCS group and the study that was done in 2020, and learned that one person that was involved in that study group, including the city, was our former city manager, Randy Kugler. And apparently he was not able to prevail with his thoughts, and so has consistently criticized the city for the model that it's adopted. I'm really glad to hear that the city's going to continue to stay on course with addressing this. I think when we adopt a schedule for review, that we should stick by it. And then I just wanted to say also that, you can't help but notice that we see stuff about a survey having been conducted, and some people responded by saying that they don't want to see any repayment of the indirect costs or limited to a specific dollar amount without any knowledge or understanding about what that impact is on the budget. And for any of those folks who answered that and said we shouldn't, I hope you'll come and talk to me, because it's really easy to sit back in your lazy boy and check a box and send it back without really understanding what goes into this. But there's a lot of work that went into this. And if you don't appreciate it, I hope you'll come and talk to me, because I just think that that's derogatory towards the amount of work that all of us have put into this. I just needed to get that off my chest. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would agree with that statement. And I think people who have completed the survey, I did not complete it myself, but if you have, please reach out and speak to us. Tell us what you're thinking.
Thank you. Yeah, we want to be as transparent and clear about this stuff as possible. And so I appreciate the feedback on its inclusion in the budget itself this year. that's another step forward for us to make things just clear. All right, onward. So the city budget. This gives you kind of the overall of all the total funds combined. So if you remember back to that chart that shows all the city funds, and one of the things that we're required to do is have a balanced budget. So the resources have to equal the expenditures. This table always tells me that we got the math right. So I'm always pleased when I see these two things add up. Kit.
Hi. All right. The question is, when I look at it, maybe something I don't understand. Okay, I'm not saying anything else without listening to you guys, the explanation. When I look at 2024-25 estimated actuals, at the bottom here, total reserve ending fund balance, you have 10,395,000. On the proposal, budget proposed 2025-26, you have the beginning fund balance 10,295,000. Is it a typo or what is it? I hope there is an explanation for it.
Oh, that includes contingency.
Yeah, but then shouldn't the beginning balance is exactly the same as the ending balance of last year? If you estimate 10,395,000, it should be 10,395,000 as the beginning of next year.
Yeah, good point. It may have. I'll double check that, but that might be right.
It doesn't discredit your whole budget. It doesn't. No. It's just something that carry forward. And that. If I don't ask somebody, some people may ask or discredit it right away. So I just want to let you know that this is it. And then, it's not really a big deal of that, the 100,000. You may have a explanation for it. It may be a typo, but it's budget. So budget change anyway. So
yeah, I'll investigate that and correct it by the time it comes back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good point. Okay. So that said, otherwise everything else adds up pretty well. And that's a healthy budget. Again, just summary of our expenditures for the fiscal year. So this is just the citywide expenditures. And then at the bottom table starts to show our full-time equivalents by department. And this is just the general fund. So we have 10.25 staff members that are supported by the general fund. And we get into the budgets in detail. You'll see there's an FTE, which is a full-time equivalent, which is a human being, how their time is allocated to different funds. Okay. So I know all of you have this in front of you, so I will skip to the kind of main things for the general fund. But one of the key things I want to point out here through a couple of years now of encouragement, primarily from Kit, is to get closer to the mark. And so I did that this year in terms of the estimate for our TLT. We still don't have our third quarter, our final quarter for the fiscal year. TLT receipts tabulated, but I felt confident based on what I have been seeing over the fiscal year that we've been tracking pretty even or a little above. And so I felt confident in that number. So the key things I just want to talk about is our beginning fund balance is $3.85 million. The revenue resources we're anticipating for next fiscal year is $1.55 million in transient lodging tax. Property taxes are fairly straightforward to estimate based on the cap, 3% growth per year on assessed value. Fees and charges are based on historical costs. Some were adjusted for inflation. The intergovernmental agreements that we have in place, fines, Interest, you'll see interest is something I was quite a bit more aggressive on than I have been in years past. And that's largely because we have a fairly large fund balance now, and we have historically now been bringing in more revenue related to interest. And then miscellaneous and transfers in. I did want to note that the beginning fund balance, if you looked at the audit and you looked at the beginning fund balance in the budget, you might have noticed a slight difference. And that was a result of a timing difference. We closed a number of funds last year, if you recall. And so the beginning fund balance for the budget reflects those funds being rolled into the general fund. Catherine, Mayor.
Just a question, not about the specific numbers, but would you say when you look just relatively, when you look at all these categories and you say, oh, I can see the proportion of 1.5 million to, our total revenue picture, would you say the categories themselves are pretty stable now, or do you see any particular category going up or down compared to the last couple of years?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel pretty confident. I feel confident in the numbers that we have. I think TLT is the one that always gives me the most heartburn because it's the least stable, and it's remained stable for the last 3 to 4 years. So I feel good about our revenue sources and their stability.
Yeah, my question
was
was
got a little more brave this year.
Yeah, my question underlying that though was, are they in proportion about the same to each other? So has any one category sort of taken more importance or less importance than it has in years past?
I think the only one that would be the interest. And I think that's tied to the increased fund balance that we have and interest rates doing what they've done the last couple of years. Kit.
Yes, talking about the transient lodging tax, that I remember you just said we're going to have a vote on the measure, right? If we vote to increase it, then there will have a significant uptick on this tax. So have you considered it in your budget?
No, and I intentionally didn't. Because we just don't know the outcome. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to, so that's where I did maintain some conservancy is I did not account for that here. I think that felt like the appropriate approach to me, but
yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's an unknown, but to kind of refer back to Catherine's question, so which one is going to have, a fluctuation up or down? Then the lodging test will be if we pass it. Yeah. So that we need to take consideration. Of course, we want more, revenue. However, on the other hand, we want to diversify it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Joy, you have your hand.
I had a question on the fines and forfeitures line. Mm-hmm. So from 24 to 25, it's gone. What's changed there?
Let me look at so we did a couple of audits for short-term rentals, and so we got an influx of revenue. I'm trying to find it in my budget here.
You know what? I remember now. I think I asked the same question last year.
That's okay. So that would probably explain it.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Now on to expenditures. Unless anyone has any other questions. Just to kind of remind folks too, kind of what's happening in the background is we do have policy reserves. So we have reserves for debt service. If you recall last year, we closed the Public Safety Reserve Fund, but in the back, we're still accounting for that. So we sort of hold that revenue back. And then we also closed a CDBG housing grant fund, But those funds, one of my goals this year is to figure out how and if I can use those funds for something. That was something that was an old fund that had specific ties, and we don't quite know what that is. So we just kind of maintain those funds in general fund, but we kind of reserve them. And then the policy requirement is we adopted a 15% that we would increase 2.5% each year until we hit 25. This year we're at 23. So so you have the designated reserves and then the policy requirement reserves. So that's kind of our rainy day fund, essentially. So really the amount we're over, our policy requirement is $2.57 million. And so that's kind of what's left once you account for all of the reserves. Kit.
Hi, can you remind me what is the CDBG?
It's the Community Development Block Grant, and the city received an allocation many, many, many years ago to provide loans for rehabilitation for folks that had lower incomes. That program expired, and most of the cities, maybe not all, I think all, returned that money back to the county, I believe, but Manzanita maintained theirs. And so I did some work the first couple of years I was here to try to figure out how to use those funds, and still haven't quite figured that out. But it's something I hope I'll have some bandwidth to do this year and see if we can use those funds in a different way.
So this is different from the affordable housing grant, right?
Yes, yeah.
So can we apply to it? I mean, is that some regulations that we cannot?
And that's just what I don't know. So I'm being safe and just kind of holding on to it until we can figure out what we can do with it.
Another quick question is there any minimum regulatory reserve requirement?
So there is not, and the city didn't have a reserve requirement, but council did adopt a policy the first year I proposed a budget, which would have been 22-23. And the policy was to start at 15%, increase 2.5% per year till we hit 25%. And so we're at 22.5% this year. So next year we'll be at our 25% policy reserve.
Okay, the requirement, okay.
Yeah. And that's just best practice, but there's no law that requires us to do that.
All right. Thank you.
You bet. Jeffrey?
Yeah, so the money that's going into the reserve here, that's the same money that is part of the unappropriated money?
Yes.
It's just adding to it. Right. And it's also 25% of what? The city's operating expenses?
Yeah, for the general fund.
What is that number off the top of your head?
That number is the policy requirement is 558,000.
558.
Yeah. Okay. And just kind of overall picture, you see kind of how general fund is divided into, we have 5 different departments. Administration is the biggest, and then public safety. Non-department is big because that's where debt service is paid out of, municipal court and parks. And I'll go through each one of these individually in terms of expenditures. So the general fund, I think the key things so the core services that we provide is oversight of all the departments. So that ensures effective implementation of council policy goals and objectives, but also the running of the city. Our department is home to 5.5 full-time equivalent employees, FTE. So that includes me, and Nina is our accounting manager. The unfilled project manager position are each 1 FTE. So we're fully funded. One of the changes this year is that the short-term rental program manager, which is Chris Bird, will be fully funded out of the general fund. He actually used to do some building permit tech work, and with the anticipated changes in workload to implement new STR policy, as well as his current workload, he is now being fully covered in the general fund, and then the planning and permit tech will take over the responsibilities that Chris has been keeping up with. There's a portion of the assistant city recorder. Technically, the full city recorder position is funded by the general fund, but it's split between two departments, which is administration and court. And the planning and permit tech, so the general fund, the administration covers the planning portion of that position, and the other half is covered in the building fund. And then the development services manager, which is Scott Gebhardt, he does quite a lot for the planning department as well as short-term rentals. And so a portion of his salary is paid out of the administration. So collectively, that represents 5.5 FTE. That's a net increase. And that should say 1 because the planning and permit tech was just unfilled last year. But compared to last year, it's a 1.5 FTE increase net. We actually moved the code enforcement position into public safety. That was actually being carried in the administration's overhead last year. Professional services, so that number went down this year. And those services are really split between operational and council goals. So in terms of operational costs, professional services includes our IT consultant, our financial advisor, the city attorney, the planner, our city planner is a contract planner, and our auditor. And this year I've added in funds. We do a salary survey every 4 years. And so this is year 4. And so we'll be doing that work. And then council related goals are, there's funds in here to complete at least the majority of the comprehensive plan and to begin the codification of the city's ordinances to create a municipal code. You'll see some increased costs in building operations, and that's a result of costs that were normally allocated to the police department, which has a separate building. We're now all one. So all of those costs have been put into the administration's budget. And those costs also include our best estimate of not only taking on a new building, which we hope will be energy efficient, and I hope I'll see that number go down next year, but I wanted to be conservative, but we also have to maintain the 2 buildings that we're already in. And then travel and training went up a little bit too. It's the 100-year anniversary of the League of Oregon Cities conference, which will be held in Portland. And I think the majority, if not all of city council, will be attending that along with me. So there was a little increase in training costs there. Are there any questions about the administration?
Here, when I look at this, page 54, what struck me is the non-operating expenditure by department, the non-departmental costs. The expenditure there, it increased quite a significant amount, 4.4 million. It has something to do with the debt with the City Hall project.
Yeah.
And that's what my concern was, like the debt service expense, that how we're going to manage it and make sure we can afford it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll get to that department, but even with that included, we are still in good shape.
I think you might have answered this before, but the financial advisor, is that like a wealth management advisor, or is he mostly accounting help?
So she is a former finance director who has worked in government accounting as a finance director for 20 years. And so she has a consulting business and so helps us with, so she's specific to government finance, not wealth management.
Thanks.
Yeah. And so I try to refer to her as a government financial advisor because she's got a very specific skill set. Joy, or chair.
The dues and subscriptions, our number has almost doubled for next year. What's changed there?
Yeah, thank you. So what I did there was, weird. Okay, it's on this slide. I moved the annual cost of our financial software, which is Cassell, from professional services to dues and subscriptions.
Okay.
I don't know why I didn't do that before, but when I looked at it again this year, I thought it seems more appropriate in that line item. So that also had a result in reducing the professional services. But yeah, thank you for catching that. And it showed up here now, but it must have been an animation or something, because there it is.
Okay.
Okay, on to the next. Municipal court. No real big changes here. This is mostly part of Nancy's job. She manages all the court-related activities, including the processing of citations, answering lots of questions, and running the monthly court and maintaining all the documents and any related responsibilities. All the expenditures in this budget are consistent with the previous year. Questions about court? Okay. Parks Department, bit of the same story here. It's maintaining and managing the city parks, and the costs have really remained the same as the prior year. One of the things I've been noodling on is if this is something that can just be absorbed by the tourism fund, because parks are a facility. So I'll be exploring that next year, but for this year, we're going to maintain this current look. Any questions about parks? Okay. The Public Safety Department, our police department, only a few modest changes here this year. So what we're proposing is that the Public Safety Department includes our chief, sergeant, 2 police officers, and it will include a portion of the code enforcement officer, but at a certified police officer level. So I'm proposing that a quarter of that be in there. We also provide limited coverage to Wheeler, Nehalem, Oz West, and Nehalem Bay State Park. I think we've missed the parking tickets in Nehalem Bay State Park, so we're looking forward to them reopening this fiscal year. Again, building operations, what has changed there is that those costs that were previously allocated to PD in their separate building, which made sense when they had a separate building, even though they physically have a separate building, it's 1 meter that we have now at New City Hall, and we want to really think of that as one building. So the administration is carrying all of those costs, and the only operational costs that are included in their line items is their cell phone services. And then there's some increases in equipment and subscriptions, and that is to cover some of the new costs associated with a new officer position. So things like bulletproof vests and so on. Does anybody have any questions about the police department budget? Okay. All right. And everyone's favorite, the non-department department. So this department is where we carry things that can't be sort of directly assigned to a specific department. And here is where that CDBG housing grant comes into play. We included the expenditures and allocation just in case we figure out what to do with it. There's additional funding in here for emergency preparedness, and then the debt service and contingency are included in this line in this department. I think that's it. Does anybody have any questions about the non-department department? Okay. So that's it for the general fund. We'll now move into the building fund, the transportation fund, the tourism fund, and then we'll wrap things up with water. All right. So the transportation fund, Transportation fund deals with maintenance, repairs, and construction on roads. The restricted revenue sources in here include the state motor vehicle fuel taxes, and then we have the Tillamook PUD's franchise agreements also come in here. And so those are the primary funding sources for the transportation fund, and they do not provide enough money really to those two sources alone do not provide sufficient resources to maintain the minimum maintenance of the city's transportation system or staff. So historically, the general fund has subsidized the transportation fund through transfers. However, there was some significant fund balance left over from previous general fund transfers, so I didn't propose one for this year. And that was used for operations and a portion of the Classic Street project. The main expenditures here is capital outlay. And this is 100% related to the Classic Street Connection project. It includes both the transportation and there is a stormwater line item, as you probably saw in here too, that's related to the roadway that's included in this project. And then the other increase was signage. There is a kind of a one-time increase in signage so that our public works director can build an inventory of signs for the city so that we can replace them more quickly and efficiently. But we don't expect that to be an ongoing cost. So Chip, there you are.
I tried.
I knew it was ominously quiet.
I know, ominously quiet, but it's not ominous. This may not be the exact place to raise the issue, but we have previously thought about some alternative revenue sources, the principal purpose of which was to raise money for maintenance of the road system. Where in the world has that gone? It's sort of dropped off the edge of a cliff or something. Are we still doing alternative revenue sources?
Yeah, so that is one of the things that I spoke about earlier that is a goal for council is to sort of reignite that discussion.
Okay.
This fiscal year.
Because otherwise, if we don't do something, the general fund's going to be back in the business of subsidizing the road fund. We get a buy this year, but it's going to come back.
Yep.
We either have to agree that it will continue to come out of the general fund or that it will have some independent funding source.
Yeah, thank you. Sean.
Yeah. What if we start to strategize on this, on better funding for this transportation fund, what dollar amount would you throw out for a goal that we need to look for annually? If you could give some guidance there, that might help with noodling on this issue.
Yeah, I mean, at a minimum, if you look at the personnel services in the M&S, right, that's the minimum to just keep the streets as they are. What we haven't priced out is what it would cost to do additional improvements. And so one thing we don't have as a city is a transportation system development charge, but we can't use SDCs for maintenance. And so that's part of the discussion that council needs to have in discussing this is that what level of maintenance is required and what level of maintenance makes sense. So I would say it would be north of the requirements for personnel and materials and services, and that there's, a reasonable capital outlay number that we come up with. It's based on an assessment of we actually already have an assessment of existing road conditions and kind of can do some estimates on what that cost would be. So at a minimum, we need about $150,000 just to operate the fund and not do projects. But I think that my guess is that the council would want to see some projects done too. So that'll be part of the conversation that they'll have. Cool. Any other questions about transportation? Okay. So next is the building fund.
Actually, I have a question.
Oh, you bet.
The other contractual services, other. What hits that line? It's been fairly low, consistently low, and then now we're at 20,000. Our budget last year was 20,000.
Yeah, so those are things like if we have any kind of an emergency that comes up, or we need something designed, or we have to have a contractor come in and do an analysis of something. So that's a number that I'm watching too, because we have historically used, half, if not less than that. But I left it as is for this year, and it's likely something that we'll look at shaving off in future years.
Essentially for unknown items.
Yeah. Yeah. Good question. Okay. All right. Move on to the building fund. So the core services of the building fund is it supports the administration and enforcement of the Oregon State building codes for all construction within city limits, including commercial and residential inspections, plan review, and code enforcement. So our building official, Scott Gephardt, he does residential building inspections and plan review, and then we have contract services for commercial. These funds are restricted and have to be used to support the building inspection program and plan review program. So the expenditures support the development services manager positions of 0.6 of Scott's FTE is assigned to this fund, and then 0.5 of the planning and building permit tech. So the other half of that person's time will be spent on building permit review, and also Scott will train that person to conduct inspections. Kit.
Hi. The 2024-25, you estimate is going to have $294,000. And on your proposal of the budget for 2025-26, you only put $194,000. It's a significantly reduced from the current year income. So I wonder if you predict there will be a slowdown in the new building, or what caused it?
Yeah, so we did a supplemental budget this year because we had 2 commercial buildings come in, which really increased the amount of revenue that came in and the amount that went out. And so that's why it looks like a drop off, is because of those 2 commercial buildings that came in.
It's just a wash.
The only other thing that's harder to predict than
yeah, I see it now. You have a wash there in expenditure.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
You bet. Good question. Any other questions on building? Okay. Tourism fund. All right. So this fund is a dedicated special revenue fund that's restricted for tourism-related activities, and it's required by state law. So this is where the 70% of the 2% comes from. The key expenditures here are for staff, and those are for the folks that are responsible for the maintenance and operations of the visitor facilities and for code enforcement. So 0.75 of that FTE number you see here is for our code enforcement police officer. And the rest is allocated across the board to various, to all of our public works staff. So those are the folks that, we have one person in particular who spends a good proportion of his time doing facility maintenance. And so this is to help offset some of the costs for the city in maintaining visitor facilities. So that includes city restrooms, that includes garbage cans, dog poop stations, and portions of the park, and materials as well. So like toilet paper, dog poop bags, etc. This is where we also fund city events, things like the annual Christmas tree lighting. We've actually budgeted to add some new Christmas lights on Laneda, so we're hopeful we'll be able to do that by the end of the year. And it also pays debt service on the visitor center, which will also be completed by the end of 27. Jeff.
So you had said earlier you were looking into using some tourism dollars for parks and recreation purposes, which is, supposedly one of the things the money can be used for. What goes into that decision? How are you going to decide whether to use some of that money? Yes or no? Is there somebody at county you have to talk to, or how does that work?
Yeah. There's some folks at the county I want to talk to. I want to make sure that our city attorney is on board with it. But right now, we do actually cover a fair amount of parks related expenses through the tourism fund. And so some of the repairs that were made, for example, to the structure at the park were done out of the tourism fund because that was a clear thing that we could pay for out of that fund. And then again, the staff that are paid out of this fund that maintain those facilities is an important part of those expenditures.
Thanks.
Yeah, Mayor.
Just as a kind of broader background, it's not a this year budget discussion, but we're limited. We're less limited than we used to be on this. So some things have shifted and eased up a little bit. But there are a number of cities in Oregon who have quite high balances in these accounts, and they literally aren't able to match the revenue that they have with projects that they're able to do. And Seaside actually is one of them. So the account just keeps going up. And one of the things, I actually don't know where it's at, if it's killed now or if it's made it to the next step, but there was a lot of discussion about this for this current legislative session in Oregon, because cities understandably are looking for more flexibility and the ability to draw a line between how these monies should be used and what they're able to use them for now. So this is something not just from a budget and planning point of view for us, but in terms of our representative and senator here in the legislature, we're keeping an eye on this because this is something where we could see shifts. It's not happened yet, but we could see shifts in the future, and a lot of cities are interested in this going forward. So just a little background on that.
Thank you. I think Chip and then Jerry.
I'm going to follow on with the mayor and with Jeff. After 2027, the money flowing into the tourism facilities and promotion fund will be even greater. Plus, if the city decides to capture the extra 4% instead of giving it over to the county, if the county measure passes, we're going to have even more money coming into the tourism fund. And so I'm wondering if the city council should appoint a group to look at possibilities for using the funds, understanding that there will also be should I call it legal review to make sure we're not pushing the envelope too far. But clearly, Commissioner Bell indicated without blushing at all that she was planning to pull $2 million out of the county's parks fund and refilling it with TLT. So it seems to me, and we have a trail network that Councilor Stegman worked on several years ago that we could be doing to utilize those funds. And so somehow I think we need to tap the community for identifying some potential projects that we could pay for with those funds.
Yeah, I think that'll be part of the strategic planning. But the one thing I will say is that I do want to make sure that the revenues that come in on an annual basis are able to cover all the operational costs that we have before, and then having a reserve as well in the tourism fund for those operational costs. And then talking about what's left. And so that'll be a conversation that council will have, I think, as part of their strategic planning, and again, just balancing that with other priorities as well. So, but I appreciate that, and I hear you. Jerry, Trail Spegman.
Yeah. Well, so I probably should just lower my hand because I'm really just jumping on the same train as Chip and the mayor and Jeffrey. But first, I do want to acknowledge that certainly in the time you've been here, Layla, you have been pushing that envelope on how more creative we can be in spending TLT money in the 70% category. My concern, as Chip has indicated, is that we may very soon be in a position to increase the amount of 70% dollars coming in. And if we do, I think we just, as Chip said, we don't have to spend those dollars as they come in the door, but we should be thinking about how we're going to spend them as they come in the door, because first we have to open the door. First we have to make an affirmative vote to raise the tax if in fact the ballot measure passes. And so if council is going to entertain a tax increase on local STR operators and their guests, I just think we need to keep an eye on that growing balance and work with you to be as aggressive as we can. I don't want to take up a lot of time here, but you've said a couple of things throughout the afternoon about that 70% money. So right now, where you are paying Max's salary, the code enforcement,
3/4, yeah, 3/4.
And that won't change with his promotion or his reassignment. That won't change. Okay.
No, it won't. I could see, and part of the issues that you're all raising are why I didn't dissolve the Parks Department this year.
Right.
I want to see what happens. Yeah. But I think you can, as long as it passes muster, that if that is the case, if council does those things, the if-thens, if they do occur, that will likely be something you'll see next budget season.
Can I ask for a quick clarification? I know we've talked about this before, but I think it's helpful to the larger community. If we can pay for Max's code enforcement activity with TLT tourism money, why can't we pay for Chris's time managing the primary tourist facilities in this town, the STRs?
Yeah. So I've tried that. That was one of the first things that I really tried that. And I did get some pushback from our legal counsel on it. But it doesn't mean I'm not willing to go to bat again. So I'm always trying to find ways to effectively and legally use this money. So we didn't pay any staff out of this fund before I came here. And I really argued pretty successfully that maintaining our facilities is a tourist related cost. And so that feels very justifiable. Managing a program, for some reason, and I can't remember exactly why that was kind of a non-starter, but I'm happy to ask that question, and maybe next year I'll have an additional proposal for that. But thank you for the reminder.
Okay. Well, sounds like there's several people anxious to help you with this issue in the months ahead. So I'll shut up for now.
All right. Cool. All right, Chip and then Brad.
So I just want to emphasize to the city council that the message should be going out that the STR owners in Manzanita will pay 14% no matter what the city does. Because I think that's a powerful message in favor of raising ours 4% so that extra money doesn't go to the county. We keep it here at home. It's an issue that I hope the city council will take up.
Well, I expect to see you at public comment when they debate this. Brad.
I know we're putting most of Max's salary in here. Have we ever considered some of the police officer salary, because they're certainly quite involved with?
Yeah, thank you. So as the mayor mentioned, there was a bill that I believe did not make it through that would more explicitly allow public safety in general to be a use of those funds. The position that Max holds is a bit unique. So one of the things that we did when we established this position, I worked with Nan Devlin at TCBA, and she had some conversations with Orla, which is the Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association, is that the real focus of his job is code enforcement. And he meets with Nan on a quarterly basis to report back to her about activities that he is doing. And so there's a much clearer nexus between that specific position than the other 4 positions that we currently have. But again, I'm pretty vigilant about this stuff, and I'll be interested to see what plays out at the end of the legislative session and whether or not we start to see a little bit more flexibility there. But that's been on my mind, trust. Okay. Love it. Hot topic. Okay. City Hall Expansion Fund. I'm so excited to talk about this one. So this was set up as a temporary capital project fund like 30 years ago, and it's intended to track the sources and expenditures associated with new City Hall. We expect that this will be finalized, paid out by the end of this fiscal year. There is a probability that we will receive our reimbursement next fiscal year. So that is possible, but Nina's just been on the spot in terms of getting those reimbursements from OBDD. I will say they have been amazing to work with. They turn those around really quickly. So substantial completion is May 15th. I expect the final bill from Cove Built at the end of the month. We will pay that and then seek reimbursement. So I feel really good about that piece being finished. And then Nina and I will reconcile all of the different costs and anything that's remaining in the City Hall Expansion Fund will get transferred in back to the general fund. And then that fund will be closed this fiscal year. Yay. That's good. Any questions about that? Otherwise, if we don't, anyway, it's going to happen. We're going to get that payment out this year. That's the big deal for us. Okay. So final capital project fund is system development charges fund. If you recall, we collapsed these into 3, but we collapsed storm, parks, and water SDCs into one fund, but we track them separately. So those and the primary resource is the water SDC. So SDCs, just to remind folks, are fees that we collect from new development for system expansion. Water we raised a couple of years ago, and you can see if you look at fiscal year 2022-23 versus 23-24, what an impact that had on our revenue. We went from, I think, $160 per residential unit to, I think it's $1,680 or something like that. So that had a big effect for us and a good positive one. Not so much for parts. That SDC is $60. And so that's another subject of conversation when we start talking about revenue for improvements. The key expenditures in the SDC fund this year are the majority of the capital outlay funds in water, and all of the stormwater SDC funds that are designated as capital outlay are for the Classic Street Connection project. And we'll run through that pretty quickly, but at the end, when I show you the sources and uses for the Classic Street project. A portion of the water SDC that's not Classic Street is going to be used for the design and engineering of a replacement and expansion of water infrastructure on Highway 101. And there are no planned expenditures for the Parks SDC. And again, these are for system expansion. And when I get to the capital improvement plan and we talk about that project, I'll explain a little bit more about that. The Public Works Reserve Fund. So this is a fund that we transfer money into to buy materials, big investments for the Public Works team. This year, the key expenditure is that they'll be buying a new pickup truck, a new service body utility truck to replace an obsolete Public Works pickup truck. So that's the major expenditure there. Any questions about that? Okay. And now we're on to water. This is the last fund. Are we ready? Let's do it. Okay. So the water fund is a proprietary fund that provides residents with potable water to support public health and sanitation. Services include meter installation, repair, system maintenance, and compliance with state and water quality regulations. The fund comprises two departments, which is operations and the well field and transmission lines. So operations is the city of Manzanita's distribution system. The well field and transmission lines are the management of the well and the transmission lines that gets the water to the city of Manzanita. Our key revenue is utility fees. City Council adjusted those fees per the Consumer Price Index for water and stormwater. And then the other key revenue source that shows up this year is the state grants for the portion of the Classic Street Connection project. So I want to just quickly go through kind of key water utility projects. Again, I'll go through this when I show you the charts for the CIP, but as the Classic Street Connection, the Highway 101 design that I've already talked about, we're proposing a replacement of a generator that serves one of our main reservoirs so that we can maintain operations and pressure during power outages, which we know we have many. Upgrading the existing Public Works facility to include an office for our director, which I think is really critical. And then there's engineering and other services as needed. So if something happens, there's a water main issue, we have funds reserved for that. Brad.
That generator you mentioned, is that out in Moeller at the water treatment plant?
No, so that's would be up at the reservoir, which is across the street from the Public Works building.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Saw a bunch of hands go up, so I'm going to try to see who went first. I think Kit, Joy, and then Jeffrey.
Mother? Is it my turn?
I think you're next.
What is water sales?
I'm sorry?
The revenue. Water sales on the revenue.
Water sales. Oh. Where's the revenue? Oh, those are when, say, like a developer needs access to one of our water hydrants. And so we sell them water. We actually sold water to a different city where we, filled up one of their water trucks. And so it's for little one-offs like that.
Wow. So 23, 24 fiscal year, we make quite a bit of money on that.
Yeah, and I can't.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I don't exactly remember why. And Dan's not here, so I can't tell you. But
and then another question is for the expenditure, and then I understand you mentioned about the Classic Street and then Highway 101. And then when I calculate the estimate actual for year 24-25, you have an uptick of 34% comparing to the prior year. And then your budget another uptick of 35% from 24-25 actual. So is it all because of the project that we are going to allocate or have more people, or because you have the personnel service up as well, not just the material and service. So I just want to understand that.
So,
It's on the water utility fund expenditure by category.
okay. And sorry, can you repeat?
Okay,
Yeah.
expenditure by category.
Mm-hmm.
I add personnel service and material and service, two categories together, and do a comparison.
Oh,
And I realized that. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
The 24-25 fiscal year actuals that you estimate is an uptick of 34% year over year from 23-24 is quite significant. And
Yes.
then you also, again, you budget another 35% increase of the 24-25 estimate number. So I just want to understand what is the logic of it.
Sure. So it's both the capital outlay that for the Classic Street project. So that's the difference between 23 and 24. And then we usually budget pretty generously for operation, maintenance, and supplies in the event that there's a catastrophic main failure or whatnot. And so we typically, so if you're looking at the difference between what is budgeted versus actual in 24, it's half. And then we're still budgeting pretty high for that in
So it's just
fiscal year
being
25.
conservative and
Yeah, because
okay.
you just never know. And we have a lot of asbestos mains that need repair. So that's one of the line items we haven't really trimmed back, but tend to use between $50,000 and $100,000 a year. So I think those two things attribute to the majority of that. And then, of course, cost of living adjustment, which was only 3% this year, but that affects it too.
Yeah. And then I just, don't quite understand that personnel. I understand the material and services, the maintenance, cost. And the personnel services, we anticipate to hire more people. It's quite a significant increase.
Yeah. So if you're talking about the estimated total end of year, so that's because we had budgeted for an open position for an operations manager. We hired that operations manager, and then our public works director left. And so that position became open again when Rick stepped into the public works director role. And because he was new to that role, his pay scale is different than what Dan was. And so I think it was a result of those openings. And now we're fully staffed. And so what you're seeing in the budget for the current fiscal year reflects a fully staffed public works department with a director, an ops manager, and 2 senior utility workers and 1 utility worker. So I think that's the major difference was staff turnover.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good questions. Thank you. Jeffrey?
Actually, coming up on 4:00 here. So we need to finish up tomorrow or?
I mean, this is pretty much close to the last slide. So folks would be willing to stick it out another 15 minutes.
I don't think I will be available tomorrow, but I asked all the questions I want to ask. So you guys can continue. Sorry,
it's up to you how long we take, but we're pretty close to the end. We have wells to get through, and that's the end of the budgets. And then I'm just going to kick through the capital improvement plan real quick. So I see thumbs up.
I'll just ask one more question, and then I'll shut up.
Okay, I'm holding you to it.
Some of the asbestos, water lines on 101 reminded me that we have some other roads that we talked about allocating money for. Windward, I think Pelican, I don't know, maybe Spyglass. I can't remember which ones. How are we preparing to pay for those? Because they're coming up.
Yeah, so this is a great question. So it's another reason why we are taking a year. We're going to pause this year, and that's one of the things that Rick and I are going to be talking about. One of the other things is because the rates that are now up to date, we are starting to create a balance in which we can actually execute on some of these projects. So we didn't really have the resources to do that. And I think once we finish out this fiscal year and we understand where we stand, we'll be in a much better position to propose projects that result in replacement of asbestos mains that are prioritized next year. Chip, you're muted, my friend.
Pressure's on now not to ask anything that takes too long. Regarding the water utility revenue, it appears that wholesale and retail sales are rolled together. Do the wholesale customers pay the same rates?
They do not, no. And they pay rates that are set, I believe, by their own utility. Like we have a rate that we charge them, and that's it. But it's different.
Is the park wholesale or retail?
It's retail.
Okay. Would it be at all helpful just to show us to break those two things out? I assume you keep them in separate accounts.
You know, we consider them, so they're customers, right? And so there's, I would say, I'm sure it would help, but I have concerns about privacy. I wouldn't break out a large customer user of, a residential user. But I can look into that and see if that's something that we can do, particularly as it relates to outside sales.
And part of the reason I'm asking is the well system is jointly owned and managed by Wheeler and Manzanita. Do the wholesale customers have some sort of priority right to any of that water flow?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
That's fine. That's time for another. I won't hold anybody.
Yeah,
up.
I don't believe we have any agreements with them that state that, but.
Okay.
And we share those outside sales revenue with the city of Wheeler. And so that brings us to the wells system. So this is resources that are here to support the well field and transmission lines. Just some, oops, I guess I didn't have my key issues here. We're expecting to do some additional studies this year. So you'll see the engineering and other services line item is increased. So we'll be doing some additional studies and analyses of the water system itself, the distribution system, and then pretty much everything else is on par with prior years. Okay. Any questions? It's okay to ask questions. That's why we're here. Remember the snail.
Okay, I have another question, which is there some big project coming up for the increase in engineering?
We have some projects that we expect, and then we wanted to be prepared for others that we don't. So, so we're just getting ourselves prepared in the event that something does come up that we need to spend those resources on. Okay. Off to the forecast. So this is pretty quick. I just did forecasts for general fund. Just again, assuming 4% annual growth for transient lodging tax, 2% for property taxes, again, just being conservative there, intergovernmental interest, fees and charges, and then the budget has the details in it: personnel services, materials and services, debt service, which includes City Hall, and capital outlay based on planned projects. And then the water utility forecast, we also did some revenue projections for that as well. And again, if we hadn't received those grant allocations, you wouldn't see that dip in the water forecast. You'd probably see a pretty steady increase. And this is great news. The first year that I was here, from a budgetary standpoint, we had $100,000 or less in ending fund balance in the water fund. And so, I want to recognize the work that went into that and the hard decisions that were made to make sure that the water system has the resources it needs to maintain its system and be resilient. It makes a big difference. Any questions about that? Okay, so I'll just quickly go through the CIP. Again, as I mentioned, we're just focusing on projects we intend to complete this year. CIP is traditionally a 5-year plan. And so kind of combining the work we're going to do with City Council and the work that we will be doing internally, we will come up with a more complete capital improvement plan. I feel like, do folks want to see those projects detailed out? Would that be helpful? Or I must have accidentally hidden the slides because I have them in here. If not, I mean, they're, yes?
I mean, yes, we should go through it.
So, yeah.
Sorry, I did not. It was inadvertent. So you're going to have to bear with me as oh yeah, I did. Why did I do that? Okay. You see that now? Okay. So the Classic Street Connection, that's our biggest project for this year. This is an estimate. One of the things I do want to point out is when we originally budgeted for this last year, it was based on a rough order of magnitude cost. This cost estimate is based on our construction documents. So it's a little more refined, and now we're out to bid. And so we'll know a lot more about actual costs. I think the key thing I want to point out here is that we would not be able to do the transportation or the stormwater elements of this project without this grant, because we just don't have the funding sources for that. The CD estimate that we got was higher than what our rough order of magnitude cost was. So a couple of points I want to make here. The water utility is actually not paying any of the costs for this project out of water rate revenue. This is grant funds. However, we had to, in order to make up the funding gap, reduce the amount of money that was going into the water utility to help ensure that the transportation element could be built. So there's a retaining wall that's included as part of this project. It is significantly more expensive than we anticipated. And so we had to do a little shifting there, which means the water SDC is going to carry a little more than we had originally budgeted for. I want to point out that the water SDC is not paid by ratepayers. Water SDCs are paid by developers to expand the system. And that is precisely what this project will do. It will add a 10-inch line that connects Laneta to Necarny and extends from Necarny up into the entrance of Loop or Legacy Road or whatever they're going to call it, which will help support the 60 units of housing that we anticipate will be constructed there, as well as any future housing in that area. So it substantially increases our both ability to support future growth in the urban growth boundary. It also creates a loop, an extra loop, which provides resiliency to the existing water system. So I just want to highlight that all of the funds that are coming out of the water utility are from the grant, and that the water SDCs are doing exactly what they're intended to do, which is help with system expansion, and that the grant funds are helping offset the costs associated with the transportation element of the project, as well as the stormwater element of the project. The other thing that's different from what I had budgeted for last year is I am including a stormwater SDCs as another piece to help fill the gap in the project cost. And again, that's for system expansion. And so that's how I've structured this. And the reason why it doesn't add up to 2.7 is because we've already spent some of that money this current fiscal year. Chip, do you want to ask your question now?
You just answered.
Your hand down.
You just answered.
Okay, cool. The Highway 101 design. So this is, I think when they realigned the road, something funky happened there, and this has been a project that's long been on our books. And so we will be working with our city engineer to design that project, and then we will likely start to budget for its construction next year. This also includes a project estimate for the Public Works office that I mentioned for our Public Works director, and then the generator project as well. And then finally, the residential pump house. So there's some, and this is up at the reservoir, not at the well station. These will be upgrades to that facility, again, to increase resiliency, deal with some deferred maintenance, and just kind of level up the water system. So those are the main capital projects that we have, in addition to maybe our largest, if not our second largest capital project that will be underway, which is Classic Street. Okay. Good. Okay. So you guys did it. You made it. Well done. See, you're so prepared. I love it. Okay. So next steps, I presume we don't need to meet tomorrow. Is that a fair judgment?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Excellent. So the next time we will meet will be at the public hearing on May 6th at 6 p.m. These are all via Zoom, as we know. Next year we'll meet in person. That's cool.
Yay.
So we'll hold a public hearing, and then that's when the budget committee votes to approve the budget, the tax levy, and the revenue sharing. And then that will then move to a public hearing at City Council. The gap between those two dates is because we have to provide notice. And that will be a time when we have another public hearing to take public comment. And then if City Council also has the opportunity to make any adjustments or changes at that time. And if not, they will hopefully vote to adopt the budget on that date. And then we are good for another year. And then we will meet again at our quarterly budget meeting.
Thank you, Leila. And then
Thanks.
this project is good, and then I can see you put so much work and effort in it. And then it changed from 2 cm thick to 1 inch thick, and then it took me a few nights to finish reading it.
That's awesome.
But it's very thorough.
Awesome.
Very
Yeah.
thorough.
Good.
So
Thank
thank
you,
you so
Leila.
much.
Thanks, Leila. Thanks, Nina. Thank you,
Yeah.
council members. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you for all your work.
So with that, I will call the
Joy,
yeah.
sorry, could I just have one word before we finish?
Sure.
And I guess Chip had his hand up too. Oh,
Goodbye.
that was a bye.
I just tried to
Mine wasn't bye. I was standing still. So I'd just like to re-emphasize the importance of the next public hearing, which is on May 6th. And I'd really encourage anybody and everybody who'd like to make a comment about the budget to show up and ask us questions. Tom made an offer earlier. That's not just Tom really, but all of us. If there are people who want to discuss things more quietly or in a different venue, I mean, we're very open to do that. We're very particular about this process though, because it is the budget process, and there's parts of it that are very much prescribed by the state. And we have to be careful, as we always are in our individual conversations with citizens and listening. So I would just say it's great if you want to reach out. It's great if you have questions that you want to submit via the channels we have open through emails or through your connections that you already have with counselors, and any and all of us will be happy to do that. And I think that's true, although our budget committee members come together for particular reasons in a particular time, but I would assume they'd be also interested in hearing from folks. So I realize public comment is challenging sometimes for people, and most of us are kind of nervous about doing something like that. So I'd love for you to step up and do that if you're able, and if you're not, there are other ways you can let us know, and we'll be glad to hear from you. This part of the timing is not just a formal thing of notice, but also the difference between May 6th and May 28th. And also between now and May 6th gives us some time to hear from folks. And I would just add, I think 365 days a year, you're able to comment on the budget. So we have a particular process for the formal adoption, but actually a big part of our work, and the council in particular, is to listen and consider any and all conversations we have and think about how does it relate to our priorities that we're setting? Are we in line? Do we have the resources to do what people are interested in? So this is a particular time of year, and it's for a reason, and we need to do it. It's important. But the budget conversation, as far as I'm concerned, really is an ongoing one that we have all year. So that's what I had to say about that. Thank you very much.
And thank you for that, Catherine. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for being so prepared. It really helps a lot. We really appreciate all the comments and feedback from everyone.
Are we done?
Are we done?
I will call the 25-26 budget review to an end. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Joy.
Bye.
Thank you,